Okay, we're here at the main shop and we are tearing down these axles. So this is the front axle out of that Project Cherokee, and we've got a little roll around stand that we're going to use to work on it. But what I've done here, since this is a 3-link kit on the suspension, it's only going to use this mount up here. So what we're doing is cutting off the old pieces. So we just used a cut-off wheel and started hacking away at this. And as you can see, that used to be right there on that. So that's just cut off. That's going to be thrown away. And then we've got us a nice little addition to add to this axle to make it look a little cooler and strengthen up that tube side. All right, as you can see here, we've got that upper link mount cut off, and this is the truss from Rusty's Off-Road if you're doing a 3-link build, and it goes basically from the housing all the way over and ties into this spring, coil spring and track bar mount over here. What that's going to do is give a little strength to this somewhat weak front axle housing. I know this is only going to be running a 33-inch tire, but look how cool that is. That's probably the only reason we're doing this anyways, because it looks cool. But once we get this all welded up and painted, it's going to look slick. So we're going to go now and under here grind all the metal to where we can have good contact here with the truss so we can weld that. But we're also going to tear down the differential, remove the shafts, the knuckles, the ball joints. We're going to remove these sway bar link studs, which are pressed into that mount there, and we're going to go ahead and get all this stuff taken out and get those ball joints pushed out so we can work a little bit better with this housing and get that gear installed. Front differential has been drained, the cover's off. So this is a 355 gear. We're going to upgrade this to a 456 to give us a little more torque and compensate for the larger tire and the added weight that we're putting on this little Cherokee. So let's get this thing apart the rest of the way. All right, we've got both knuckles off, the axle shafts out, as well as the unit bearings. And that's when you're gonna take these things and check everything out. So for example, on this shaft here, when you can smoothly do this, kind of feel that, everything is smooth, there's no wear. Sometimes you'll see down in the cracks here, you'll see an area that looks chalky, like a red rusty chalk, and then it might be tight going this way or this way. That means you've got a U-joint that is dried up. There's nothing wrong with these, but for $25 each for the Spicer Solid 760X, well, they're probably gone up now in 2022, but they used to be $25. We're gonna go ahead and replace both of these axle joints. The threads on both of them are in great shape. Splines are good. Down here on the diff side, these splines look great. The seal surface is nice and smooth. We'll just take a little bit of emery cloth and clean that up, but no twisted splines or anything like that. One thing to note on the steering knuckles that is a common problem on these, they don't have any clips, or I'm sorry, slides. You know, on some newer cars, there's a stainless steel clip that snaps on that wears against this. These do not have that, so it's a real common problem. And I don't know if you can see that in here, but there's a divot worn in there from the brake pad. So not sure what we're going to do there, if we're going to replace these knuckles. I've seen them a lot worse that still work just fine, so we'll look into the cost of that. Regardless, if we reuse these, we're going to definitely clean them up. Maybe have them blasted and we'll paint them. But the other thing I was going to show you was right here on these unit bearings. This one right here is was off the long side, and you can't tell, but when I turn this, it feels what I call crunchy. So you can, like, it's going as you turn it, and you can feel it catch and release and catch and release. So it's got a bearing that's worn out. So we're definitely going to be putting some unit bearings. This one over here is really smooth, but it's real loose, so it shouldn't spin that easily by hand. So we're going to put 2 new unit bearings on here, a couple of axle joints, and then we may look at replacing both of the steering knuckles. And then moving on up here to the axle housing itself, we're going to be replacing both upper and lower ball joints on both sides. All right, those ball joints are now gone, and what we used for that was this tool here. This is what we call a ball joint press. This one is a Cornwell, but OTC and all the other tool companies make this. All right, so I took a pair of pliers and just pinched that and just twisted around, and it came loose. So you can see that's just a press-in fitting. Well, I say press-in, it's plastic, but it just pushes into that hole there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab our 1/8" pop tap, stick it down in there, and see what kind of hole that already is. It might not need to be re-drilled. It might be big enough that we can just start that tap, so let's give that a shot. All right, so we ended up, we had to drill this out just ever so slightly for that pipe tap to start feeding in. So we've got that tapped, and we've got this fitting in there with some pipe dope on the threads, and that is in there and installed. And looking at that to the inside, it's hard to tell, but it's up in there. You can see it right there. So now our next thing, we've got this thing just about stripped to everything that we're gonna do. So we've got one last thing, and that's this bushing right here. So with the Iron Rock long arm kit that we got, we opted to upgrade this to a flex joint that I believe has a 1/2" bolt in it. So if you remember when we took this off, this is a 10mm bolt. It's like an M10 1.5 thread. So we're going to upgrade that to half inch hardware. So we need to get this bushing out so that we can install that Iron Rock flex bushing. Okay, so we've got the truss fully welded on. You can see that it's welded on over here and then along the bottom edge, and then back here on the casting goes up and around. And the only part that's not welded is down here next to the filter, well, not filter, the vent tube. So what we did was we had to wrap this up after, what I did was did one of these, and then I'd let it cool, then I'd do another one, let it cool, and then we did the casting last, and we preheated this. Didn't have our oxyacetylene available at the time, so just put a little MAP gas torch on here and heated that up, welded it, post-heated it, and then wrapped it and let that cool for like 2 or 3 hours before unwrapping it. So that's all done. We are in the process of setting up this 456 gear set. We reused all the original shims back here on the pinion, and we've got setup bearings on the side of our carrier. Now, this had a 355 carrier before. We had this used 373 and up carrier, so we put our 456 gear on that carrier, got our setup bearings on there. Our other bearings that we're going to press on when we're completely finished are going to be these 2 new bearings right here. Those will press on after we get the setup all complete. So we've got this in there, same standard pinion depth, but we have about 11 thousandths backlash. So we're going to change the backlash, and then we'll run a pattern on it and see how that looks. Okay, so what we've done, we've actually taken a little bit out of this side. I think we took 5/1000 shim out of this side, added it over here, and now we start out on the -2 and goes up to 5. So we've got a difference of 7/1000. So our backlash is in that 6 to 10/1000 window, a little tighter than what it was before. And one thing to note whenever you take apart a Dana differential, they have these labeled. So you can see the H right here beside each other, and that's in the vertical position. And move over here, and that H is in the horizontal position. So Dana does this, not a lot of other manufacturers do. So it's a good idea whenever you take apart a differential, look for the letters to match. And if it's not, what I normally do is put like a punch notch here and a punch there, and then over here I do 2 and 2. Or if you have a letter stamp, you can actually add that. But we've got good backlash now, and we have the caps on correctly. We just zip these down snug, a little bit past finger tight, not torqued yet. We're gonna go ahead and run a pattern on this and take a look at it. All right, so we've run the pattern on this, and you didn't see it in the video because I only have 2 hands, but after we stopped the video, I would hold the pressure with the palm of my hand here as we were spinning it. What that does is it kind of loads it up and gets a good pattern. So here's what we've got for a pattern. On this front axle, this is the drive side here, and usually on a strong axle, you've got the drive side on that convex side. So if you can see right here, let me try to get in there. The pattern is mostly in the middle of the tooth, and that's what you want. It doesn't matter if it runs off this edge here or that edge there. You just don't want it to run off the tip over here or down in there. So if you see a half moon down in there or a half moon out here, you'd want to change that. So this one's right in the middle of the tooth. That's on the drive side. And let's take a look at the coast side. So hopefully you can see that okay. Coast side is the same way. So we've got the pattern, that fluorescent or LED light up there doesn't help much, but so we've got the pattern mostly in the middle of the tooth. So our coast and drive side looks good. We've got good backlash. So we're going to take this thing back apart. We're going to press on our bearings for the carrier, and then we're also going to set the preload here with the shims for the pinion. Go ahead and put the seal on, and we'll get this thing sealed up and painted. That way we can get it back to the other shop to get it thrown back under our XJ project. All right, so we've got this washer down in here that kind of keeps the oil maintained in that bearing housing. That way on this high pinion, you've got a oil just kind of trapped in here the whole time that it's running. And here's our pinion seal. You can see we lubricated that seal just a little bit. And then on the back side, I usually pack that with grease. And that will, what that does is when you go to put this in and you're smacking on this, it won't jar that spring loose in the back side of that seal, which can happen. I've done that several times. So what I do is pack that with grease, and then we're going to put just a little bead of silicone around the seal, and we'll drive that seal down on there. All right, we've got our pinion seal in there, and then one thing we do is put a little silicone on those splines. That way fluid can't seep out. So we're going to slide that on there, and then we're going to grab our new nut and washer. So we've got our new washer on there, and then we're going to put a little bit of red Loctite. On that. And then just run that down, and I don't know what the spec is on it, but 150 to 200 foot-pounds, something like that. And there is your completed setup pinion. Still has that same 15 inch-pounds of rotational torque and the seals in. So now we're ready to install the carrier. All right, so went ahead and pressed in one of these inner axle seals. That seal looks like this here, and there's going to be one on each side of most front differentials. So what I did is I put a little layer of silicone around that shiny silver part, and that's what presses in there. And the tool that we used for that was this right here. I've had this for about 20 years, bought that from Randy's Ring and Pinion a long time ago, but it fits the inside of that seal. And what you'll do is you put that in, and then you run this nut with this 1/8", I think that's right. Yeah, 1/8 wrench right here, and it will force that seal in. So we'll go ahead and get this other one put on. All right, in terms of preload for the carrier bearings here, we can't measure that the same way that we did with the pinions. So what you want is you want the carrier to fall most of the way in, but see right here, it's not all the way in. You want to be able to drive it in with a rubber mallet pretty firmly. All right, now we've got that seated all the way. Backlash feels pretty darn good. So let's get these bearing caps put back on. And then we're going to check everything one more time. Now again, remember, we got the H's lining up vertically there and horizontally over here. The carrier in, the carrier caps are tight. And what we're doing is we're going to check the carrier preload now. So our backlash opened up just a little bit. We've got 9/1000ths backlash now that our bearings are pressed on. And we drove that carrier in with the rubber mallet, so it seemed like it had some preload. And then we put our drill back on here, ran a pattern. Pattern still looks good. We're getting total rotating torque now. So remember, before we had 15 inch-pounds. And then now with the new setup, we have what is between 20 and 25, so we'll say 22. So to get our carrier bearing preload, we're going to subtract our original 15 inch-pounds from the pinion from our 22 measurement that we got from the total. So that is a difference of 7. And then you'll multiply 7 by the gear ratio. So 7 times 456, we're going to have in the neighborhood of between 28 and 35 inch-pounds. And our spec for carrier preload is 20 to 50 inch-pounds. So we're right there in the middle of our preload for the carrier. So we are ready to put some sealer on this cover, button it up, and get it painted. All right, so we've got the axle all sealed up. We're getting ready to do some paint work. We're going to remove the bolt here for the steering stabilizer, as well as the bolts for the shocks and the spring retainer. But we've got one other thing to address, and that is this hole here for the track bar. Originally was a 10mm bolt, and now it's going to be a 12mm, so we need to drill out that hole. So we're going to do that now. And I didn't have a 12mm drill bit, so we're just going to step it up a little bit at a time. And you can see that one's still not quite big enough. All right, so now we've got that 12mm bolt that can fit through there, and that ended up being a 15/32 drill bit. All right, we got the axle flipped over and another coat of Steelit on there, so it's just about ready to go back. We are going to go ahead and throw in these ball joints while we've got it here, so we don't have to take special tools back to the house. But anyway, these are the TTX. It says Terrain Tough Extreme from Napa, and here are the part numbers for the upper and lower ball joints. And then here's what they look like. So they've got like a some sort of coating on here with a green boot. But the bottom, the lower one, comes with this installation adapter. So we'll check that out and see what it takes to get these put in. Okay, so this adapter here we didn't need to use. We actually had one that better fit the blower ball joint as well as the receiving part in our kit. Sorry for the air compressor there, but we're going to go ahead and get this lower pressed in. All right, so you want to make sure that around the whole perimeter of that is seated and you can't see a gap. So this one looks good. So we're going to move on while we've got those tools out and do the other side. All right, there's our little guy all wrapped up. We've got one more thing to do before we leave here, and that's install the Iron Rock Off-Road flex joint in that mount there. So as you can see here, we've got that Rusty's truss all finished up. Looks pretty nice and kind of makes that axle look cool. Although it's not the strongest thing in the world, it's going to be great for these 33-inch tires. That is a couple of coats of Steel It Black, which kind of looks like a charcoal, really dark charcoal color when it's dried up. But we are going to throw that joint in and head on back. All right, so I'm going to use this. This comes with some of those old Johnny joint, or the Johnny joint style things for this, and it's used as a driver. So we're just going to drive that in and get that fully seated. All right, we've got that flex bushing installed here. So there's a shoulder on the rim of this that bottoms out down in there on that. So it does look a little offset. I would prefer it be 100% centered here, but that's just the way it is. But this joint, whenever there's a link arm in there, it will allow it to pivot pretty freely and give the Jeep some good flexibility. All right, so we slid this thing under here, and one thing I forgot about was we upgraded this joint here to a 1/2-inch bolt. So that's what that is right there. So when you do that, they come pre-drilled with 10mm hardware, so we need to drill out this arm to 1/2 inch, and then we're going to go get a grade 8 bolt to attach that arm to that position. That way we can slide these springs in here and get this thing buttoned up in the front. Another thing that we purchased that just came in was this little guy right here that snaps up in here. There we go. And that's the bump stop. And then we're going to probably drill this and maybe tap it 1/2-13. And then we're gonna get the stackable bump stops. That way we can choose what size we need. But we've got that track bar bracket on, bump stops in, and we're gonna run to the hardware store and get that bolt so we can swing this thing up and get it attached. Front axle is officially under the Jeep. We had to make a few different trips here for some hardware, but we ended up getting this 1/2 inch grade 8 bolt and lock nut. And then we also got some different 12mm fasteners for here. The Iron Rock fasteners, they only supplied you one. And then down here, they want you to use a 3/8 bolt for that. And what we've done is we drilled this one out to 12mm as well. So we've got 12mm hardware for both of those, and then we got some crimp lock nuts, which are the nuts that have the locking tabs on them That way when you tighten them down, you don't have to worry about split lock washers. But there's one other thing we're gonna have to modify, and that's gonna be this piece here. That's this little tab nut, and I was wrong. They supplied one for here that was 7/16. I believe that's what that is. And then you've got this tab nut that fits up in here. So we're going to remove this nut and then weld on one of our crimp lock nuts onto the back of that. That way we can use that 12mm fastener in that position. So we're gonna go ahead and get that done and get the track bar put on. All right, so this right here you can see was just barely tacked into that right there. So we just flipped it upside down, put it in a vise and knocked it out. It did deform that just a little bit, but that doesn't really matter. So what we're gonna do now is place this M12 fastener on here and put a couple of welds on the side of it, and then we're ready to reassemble. All right, we got the shocks, the arms, the track bar in. Everything is looking pretty good. Gonna get some more hardware this week, and we'll get that sway bar bushing addressed. So we got sway bar, knuckles, axles, brakes, hubs, rotors, calipers, some stainless brake hoses, and we will get this thing hopefully on its front feet this week.